They were out early one morning, panning in the stream for gold, surrounded by the rising mountains. Old prospector with a tale for two, he brushed around in the pan, and pointing out what lay within was ordinary sand. He began with his story about 20 years before, and the younger man who sought his fortune. With a tear or two he told of searching for his treasure, but making known the gold he sought was ordinary pleasure. There were years of doing without, and there were years of plenty. He started thinking that life was never steady, excepting when the bills came in and he had no money to pay. Whiskey had never tasted better ordinarily. Concluded his story as it filled the air with a laugh, saying how he found the Lord and Savior, and how he found the river of life by which his day unfolds, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold, and pointing out what stands within is not ordinary gold. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. Through His word we can see His wonders, signs and miracles of His love. We can return His love with devotion, standing on His word before all men. We are His beloved and His chosen, walking in this life renewed with peace. Trust in God, believe upon His promises. love. We can return his love with devotion, standing on his word before all men. We are his beloved and his chosen, walking in this life renewed with peace. Trust in God, believe upon his promises. Trust in God, believe upon his promises. Believe upon his promises.
Welcome. My name is Mark Wallace. This is True North Studio, and today the title is Psalm 22, Jesus' Master Class on Grief. Have you ever wondered what went through the mind of Jesus while he was being crucified? Have you ever tried to imagine what he was thinking about after being so viciously beaten and then nailed through his hands and his feet, staked to a wooden post? Where does someone's mind go when they know they're going to die? Well, Jesus had a plan. During the final 3 minutes of his life, Jesus sang a very specific song. The song was so perfect, so well chosen, so packed with meaning and hope that it helped him complete his calling and helped him believe to rise from the dead. Each psalm is a song and has a very specific godly purpose. They're designed to refocus our believing energy and to bring to pass a specific outcome. If you think about it, hasn't the powerful 23rd Psalm gotten you all through a lot? Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Or what about Psalm 46, how it helps us keep things simple? Be still and know that I am God. And here's a biggie we all like, Psalm 107:20. He sent his word and healed them and delivered them from their destructions. Out of all the great Psalms, Jesus chose Psalm 22 as his final soundtrack. Why? Why? Psalm 22 was a song written by King David via revelation to help people like us transition through the toughest battles of life, even death. This particular song was in the head of Queen Esther when she risked her life to save her people from genocide. In fact, did you know that Psalm 22 is still sung by the modern Jews during their festival of Purim, which commemorates Queen Esther how she saved the Jewish people from the genocidal maniac Haman. This song was probably on the lips of Daniel when he was trapped in the lion's den and had to believe to make it through the night. You can easily see parts of this song in Jonah's prayer just before he blacked out and died in the belly of the whale. Jesus knew that if Psalm 22 helped Jonah believe to rise from the dead, it would help him too. There must be a big reason Jesus chose to sing Psalm 22 during the final 3 minutes of his majestic life. If you have ever been to a grief counselor or lost a loved one, you have absolutely sung parts of this song in your own words, but getting to the end of the song is the key. This song helps us shift our minds through all the gears of hurt and grief. We flow from denial and anger to bargaining with God. Then we enter the deep, dark valley of depression. Finally, we claw our way out of it with the believing acceptance that comes from a well-practiced hope. During the worst of times, we may repeat this process multiple times a day. Psalm 22 was not written to take away your pain. It was meant to keep you alive. But if you can't believe to stay alive much longer, then it shows you what to expect on the other side. When believed, Psalm 22 is powerful enough to get you through the worst of times. This song could literally save your life or the life of a loved one. Psalm 22 is a master class on manhandling grief, denial, and anger. This is where the grief process usually begins. Grief can be caused by the loss of life, loss of a job, loss of a position on a team, or even a shattered dream. Loss brings grief. You can't believe what just happened. Now listen to this first stanza, Psalm 22, 1 and 2. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? Why art thou so far from helping me and from the words of my roaring? O God, I cry in the daytime, but thou hearest not, and in the night season, I'm not silent. Now we've all said that phrase a time or two using different words. God, can't you see I'm going through a tough time here? Where are you? I need a little help. I've been asking for your help, God. Are you even listening? Now don't tell me you've never said something like that before. Most of you will remember that the first and last lines in this song were written in the Gospels. Why hast thou forsaken me? And it is finished. The part of the song that was left unwritten by the Gospel writers was totally familiar to everyone, and I mean everyone in Israel. Some ministers try to dig Jesus out of the hole by telling us that Jesus never actually said that God forsook him. They scramble some Aramaic words and phrases to prove their point. These researching teachers were wrong, but only because they didn't really understand the purpose of Psalm 22. Then there is the hellfire and brimstone preachers who tell us that God forsook Jesus because he became sin. Makes my eye twitch. Even though we hate to admit it, we've all wondered where God was when we really, really needed him. It's usually the first human response to a very bad situation. Why did you let this happen to me, God? Why did you let this happen to my child? Why do you let bad things happen to good people? We usually begin our transition through life's biggest problems with a little denial and a wee bit of anger. That's exactly why David starts Psalm 22 out like this. It's denial, anger, confusion, shock, and fear. They're usually our first responses when tragedy strikes. We all go through it. That's why Jesus chose David's song number 22. Bargaining. Now we're going to see that Psalm 22 will shift our attention from denial and anger to what we call bargaining. We all do it. We're struggling to find meaning. The stages of grief may not hit you in the same clinical order as the Kubler-Ross grief cycle that you learned about in your grief management class. They may hit you in a clump or machine gun style, or they could surprise you like a roundhouse kick. When the going gets really tough, we try to make a deal with God. This is common and a necessary step in the healing process. Bargaining or negotiating is an attempt to regain control. We wonder if there was a way, somehow, to change the outcome. If only we had gotten a second opinion. If only we had taken her to the doctor sooner. If only I had picked up the phone the last time Aunt Sandy called. It's not always a real bargain. It's hypothetical. It can never really be kept. It just makes us think we could have had some semblance of control. The bargaining process helps us begin to accept the truth of what's happening on an emotional and a psychological level. At this stage of grief, we're still looking for a rescue, a breakthrough medical treatment, a miracle, an angel, a prayer said just right. We bargain. Psalm 22, 3-5. But thou art holy, O thou that inhabitest the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in thee. They trusted, and thou didst deliver them. They cried unto thee, and were delivered. They trusted in thee, and were not confounded. See, we take the attention off ourselves and onto others. God, you're amazing. Everybody said so. The greats of the Bible trusted you, and you delivered them. I'm not trying to be disrespectful here, God, but when they prayed, you sort of kind of answered them. What about me? When something bad happens to us, our first response is usually denial or anger. I can't believe this really just happened to me. We then shift our focus to others to try to make sense of things. We begin to plead our case with God. Like a seasoned negotiator, we say, Mr. Creator, sir, I personally know of others who got hit really hard too, and you delivered them all. What about me? Or the very Italian, my child did nothing wrong. Take me instead. Set at volume on our knees while wringing our hands and tears popping out. Don't try to tell me you haven't done this. Please, God, please. I've been a really good boy or girl. Please help me. Bargaining is in Psalm 22 for a reason. But if no bargain can be reached, if no miracle cure seems to be happening, if no person or angel comes to the rescue, we usually move into step 4, which is depression. Depression. These steps of negotiating a pass through sorrow help us formulate ways to cope with our grief. Some people will go through each stage almost chronologically. Others may skip a stage. Some will go through the stages in a different order. Sometimes they hit us all at once. During the stage we call depression, the grieving person begins to accept the reality of our death or loss. This step freezes us in our tracks. Before this point, we're able to do something. We could deny, we could be angry, we could even bargain. Now we realize that there's nothing more that we can do. We leave it up to God and we sink deeply within ourselves. We lose the energy to fight. Thinking about our messed up situation is depressing. Listen to what Jesus sang about in this next stanza and it will blow your mind. The song tries to make sense of why this happened and who is responsible. I want to point out that King David, Jesus' great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather, the man who wrote this song by revelation, actually saw what was going on inside the head of the Christ. Almost 1,000 years before Jesus was born. This is a little mind-boggling. Now notice the clear revelation David saw when he wrote this song. Psalm 22, verse 6. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men and despised of the people. The first point in this section is Jesus taking inventory of his body and his emotions. We do the same thing after an accident or an attack or a rape. We go through a mental checklist. The phrase "I am a worm" doesn't mean a cute little wiggly worm that you see in your garden. The worm in verse 6 was the world famous crimson beetle. This important beetle scampers up a tree and holds on for dear life. It actually attaches itself to the tree and will never move again. The beetle then bloats up many times its size, inflating itself with a red liquid that looks, and then it starts looking like a little round berry, red berry on a branch. Now Jesus could see and feel his savagely beaten body begin to bloat like the crimson beetle. He too was attached to a tree with crimson, and he was crimson colored, blood colored, and his body was beginning to swell. Romans were masters at beating someone within an inch of their life, but making damn sure they stayed alive for their crucifixion. David, by revelation, could see what Jesus looked like. That is some colorful revelation, folks. One more point of comparison between Jesus and this crimson beetle. The red liquid inside that beetle is still harvested even today. For thousands of years, this red dye was used to stain cloth with an indelible red color. The crimson beetle's dye was the red dye used in Jesus' crimson robe. It was also the crimson dye used in the red stripes of America's first flag. Many of you have worn the red of the crimson beetle. When the crimson beetle dies on that tree, it stains the wood a red color that will never come out. To jump ahead of things a little bit, doesn't the blood, the memorial of Jesus' accomplishments, the communion, indelibly impact all who believe? Sure. The song now takes the devilish shift from physical punishment to verbal attacks. We're still talking about depression here. Jesus saw his beautiful body beaten beyond recognition. After many hours of torture and 3 hours on the tree, Jesus knew he barely looked like a human anymore. He was all red, puffy, sore, swollen, and naked. Verse 7 and 8, all they that see me shall laugh me to scorn. They shoot out the lip. They shake the head saying, he trusted on the Lord that he would deliver him. Let him deliver him. Seeing he delighted in him. The song points out the mean things people say when you're vulnerable. This is bullying at its best. You and your kids have all gone through bullying at some level. Everybody does. Just when you begin to shine, just when you begin to advance, someone tries to pull you back down. They liked you the way you were. They want you to know your place in the hierarchy. Trying to better yourself and escape your present situation is the cardinal sin of the crab. When you try to leave the bucket, another always tries to pull you back down. Today we hear about kids killing themselves because of cyberbullying. Bullying doesn't just happen to kids. I remember when I was a young minister, my wife gave birth to a full-term, stillborn baby. Instead of a cry, we heard only silence. It still hurts. All those hollow years of what could have been. What also hurt was a few of our fellow ministers actually told us that this happened to us because we did something wrong, that we didn't believe. They actually told us that God was punishing us. As they say in Alabama, bless their hearts. Now don't get me wrong. There were many people who comforted us during that time, but some of the leadership was pure evil and ignorant. This verse of Psalm 22 says they laugh at me, they disrespect me, they make taunting faces, they even twist the word of God and throw it back in your face. We've all heard that song. Now to begin to get out of that deep, dark bummer room, David looks into the mind of Christ and begins and brings our minds back to a more simple time when life was good and we felt loved and protected. We take it down to our deepest, warmest memories. People do this. Today we have photographs and PowerPoint slideshows to help us remember a loved one, reflect on better times. David and Jesus, they only had well-rehearsed memories. Verse 9 and 10, but thou art he that took me out of the womb. Thou didst make me hope when I was upon my mother's breasts. I was cast upon thee from the womb. Thou art my God from my mother's belly. The connection between a mother and child is usually pretty deep. In the first century Middle East, moms would nurse their children longer than modern mothers do. A kid may nurse until they were 4 or 5 years old. That bond between mother and child is a powerful and deep-rooted memory. One of my earthier sister-in-laws allowed her kids to nurse until they were school age. They would be playing like normal kids and then run up to her, lift her shirt, suckle for a moment or two, and then just as quickly run back out and go playing. It was sort of weird to watch, but hey, that would have been more how it was in Jesus' day. See, this part of the song is really talking about the simple comfort of mom and God and childhood. When the Christ was born, Joseph delivered that baby, and then he laid the baby Jesus on Mary's belly so he could begin to nurse. Spiritually, Mary gently handed him over to God at that exact same second. During this song, Jesus was thinking about his mom. It's heartbreaking, but Jesus' mother was literally right there standing next to him. She heard him singing the song she had taught him so many years before. When the going gets really tough, we make our minds go back to a simpler time in our life when we were totally cared for. It's important. Now, I've read that until the 1940s, when a soldier was dying on the battlefield, his last words would usually be mom or mama, no matter what country he was from. Well, after such a tender moment, after Jesus' radiant reverie of mom and his youth, it gets yanked away in the song. Drama. Verse 11, be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Again, the song calls out for God because things are about to get worse, much worse. The reality of the situation is about to sink in. Most people usually stop right here in their grief process. They'd rather keep themselves in a quasi state of happy depression. They don't take it to this next step because it's so ugly, but so necessary, especially for a spiritually minded person. Verse 12 through 13. Many bulls have compassed me. Strong bulls of Bashan have beset me round. They gaped upon me with their mouths as a ravening and a roaring lion. We went from feeling like a worm, a swollen crimson beetle, to thinking about Mom and God, to being surrounded by bulls and a blood-stained lion gorging itself on its prey. Now the song takes us into the spiritual side of death. It's kind of important to remember who the author of death is, so we can stop blaming God. Think John 10:10. This is unwrapping this situation to its least common denominator. Most people don't want to go here. It's easier just to blame God or themselves or the caregiver or the minister. Two animals are mentioned, the lion and the bull. David now sees the Christ being surrounded by stomping, snorting wild bulls that live near Bashan on the east side of the Jordan River, and a hungry lion tearing at its meal. These are dangerous, wild, untamable animals. The blame has finally shifted away from God. For you advanced thinkers, this relates to people born of the seed of the serpent, manipulating that crowd. Call them the children of the devil, people who've totally sold out to the systems of the world. This evil can never and will never be trained out of them. The song wants us to feel something, to be aware of where the attack is really coming from. Today they would call it mindfulness. Mindfulness. We take in the reality of the situation. And now we stop lying to ourselves. This is really, really happening. This is the mood that God, via David, wants Jesus to transition through. It's still depressing, but at least we're moving. This is us pushing through that valley of death from Psalm 23. Verse 14 and 15. I'm poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It's melted in the midst of my bowels. We all know that sinking feeling in our gut, when our world is crumbling around us. The term bones out of joint is very specific to Jesus here. David saw this, maybe even felt this. The Romans would sometimes rack criminals to pull their shoulders and hips out of their sockets. This was why Jesus couldn't carry his own cross. He just couldn't. His shoulders and possibly his hips were dislocated. Have you ever had a dislocated shoulder or hip? Verse 15, my strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue cleaveth to my jaws, and thou hast brought me into the dust of death. This is a mental inventory. He's assessing the situation. He's right at the brink of death, but he can't let go yet, not yet. Like a bad dream, the song now switches animals. But this is a very mature step you're going to see. Only you top-level thinkers, will be able to catch the significance of this shift. Verse 16, for dogs have compassed me. The assembly of the wicked have enclosed me. They pierce my hands and feet. See, now it switches to dogs surrounding him. First he was circled by wild snorting bulls, and now it's snapping dogs with their heads low and teeth showing, biting him, piercing his flesh. As you know, dogs will follow the larger predators and go for the scraps after the alphas have eaten. Hungry feral dogs would have actually fed on the crucified people. The dogs of Israel were not wild, untamable animals like a lion or bull. They would have been feral dogs. Feral is not wild. Like a feral pup, a feral person can reintegrate into godly society. Wild can't. It calls these dogs the assembly of the wicked. These are the pawns. They're the people who are manipulated by the big boys to act and speak against you. It's like your best friend turning on you in middle school because of pack mentality. We saw this form of media manipulated crowd control play out in spades during our recent pandemic. I hope you noticed the words, they pierce my hands and feet. If that doesn't help you see who this song was really written about, I don't know what to say. The Romans literally nailed Jesus to the wooden post through his hands and feet. David saw this 1,000 years earlier. Like a spike, a single dog's bite can literally pierce the feet or hands. My daughter works at a veterinary clinic. And the other day, one of the doctors got bit by a large German shepherd she was treating. It not only broke the bones of her hand, it pierced a hole all the way through her hand. This was someone's house dog, too. Crucifixion was not a form of punishment in David's day, 960 or so years before Jesus. This must have been shocking for him to see. You got to remember, this is still a song, a very dark song so far. We all go through dark times. And if you haven't yet, you will. Verse 17, I may tell all my bones, they look and stare upon me. See, we're now taking inventory. David could see some of Jesus' bones peeking through his red, bloated skin. It's depressing, but it's a necessary step. Verse 18, they part my garments among them and cast lots upon my vesture. Again, this stanza is very specific to Jesus. David wrote about seeing the underpaid Roman soldiers drawing straws as to who would get what piece of Jesus' clothes. This also lets you know that Jesus was stripped naked and hanging there totally exposed. Have you ever been called out and attacked openly at school, work, or church? Have your friends ever turned on you to improve their social status? It's very humbling and very depressing. Have you ever felt naked and exposed in front of a self-appointed tribunal of turds? Sure you have. Jesus was totally naked, both physically and emotionally. Now we wrap up this section of the song, verse 19 and 20. Be not thou far from me, O Lord, O my strength, haste thee to help me. Deliver my soul from the sword, my darling from the power of the dog. David recaps what we go through spiritually. Hurry up, God. Deliver me from death and from these spiritual scavengers. The King James Version, where he calls God my darling, simply means you're my one and only God. I love you, man. I love you. Verse 21, save me from the lion's mouth, for thou hast heard me from the horns of the unicorn. Now, the horns of the unicorn, plural, is a funny translation. The word unicorn is not a pretty white pony with a single spiraled horn sticking out of its head and a long blue mane for little girls to brush with tiny pink plastic combs. See, it would have been a magical moment for Jesus to picture himself surrounded by a snarling herd of angry, non-binary unicorns sliding down a rainbow. You see, the word unicorn, better translated, is really just that wild bull of Bashan, that we read about earlier. That's all it was. As the New Jersey Italians used to say, you mess with the bull, you get the horns. This ends the denial, the anger, the bargaining, and the depression section of this song. This is as far as most people go when transitioning through grief. This is where people get stuck in their endless loop of horror. They don't allow themselves to go to the next level. We will. David's song is going to take us there. Acceptance and hope. The song is now going to take us further on the path through grief than most of us are willing to allow our minds to go. This next section is where all victory lies. Psalm 22 has been growing us through the grief process. The further we go in this song, the better our life will be. Jesus knows he has to make it to the end of the song just a few more moments. This was Jesus' favorite part, always had been. What started off in denial turns quickly into anger at God, ourselves, or others. We feel hopeless, helpless, cornered, and forsaken, but that's totally normal. It's totally human. Next, we begin the bargaining process. God, if you can help them, would you come over here and help me too? What about me, God? Then our thoughts turn inward and we slip under those dark blankets of depressing thoughts. And finally, we make our mind hope, which builds our believing that we or a loved one will be free from the pain now or someday. Jesus' grief process builds advanced level believing. This is hope. This is hope. Try to picture in your mind what David and Jesus and so many of the greats did in their minds so they could believe for deliverance. This is bringing to mind a clear and present picture of your future. Building a hopescape. A hopescape is not easy when you're in the midst of pain or some private hell. So build it ahead of time. That's the tip. Build your hopescape ahead of time. Here we go. This is what the Bible greats did with their minds when the going was really tough. Verse 22 and 23, I will declare thy name unto my brethren in the midst of the congregation will I praise thee. The words I will indicate future thinking and assuredness. This line of the psalm can actually be found in Jonah's prayer when he was drowning and being crushed inside the whale. Verse 23, ye that fear the Lord, praise him. All ye the seed of Jacob, glorify him and fear him, all ye the seed of Israel. This part of the song is actually written directly to those of Israel who made it. This is just after the resurrection of the just. These people would have been newly risen from the dead when Jesus saw this. Hang in there. He's going to sing about you in a second. Verse 24, For he hath not despised nor abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, neither hath he hid his face from him. When he cried unto him, he heard. Notice how the song has now fully transitioned from feeling forsaken in verse 1 to knowing that God never disliked you. He never hides from you. And God always, always hears you. Grief is a process. It takes time. It takes work. God has always been there for you. We just can't see it at times. He's always heard your prayers, your cry, your tears. Verse 25, my praise shall be of thee in the great congregation. I will pay my vows before them that fear him. This part of Psalm 22 is almost verbatim in Jonah's prayer. I'd be willing to bet that Jonah sang this part of the song with his final bubbling breath. Jesus knew that this section of Psalm 22 helped Jonah believe to rise from the dead. He even mentions it in Matthew 12:40. Paying your vows is having a chance to finish what you started. We have all the time in the world to tie up any loose ends with people or with God in heaven. We're going to have an eternity to complete our calling and pay our vows. So don't sweat it. Don't sweat it if you haven't done it yet. David wrote this almost 300 years before Jonah, almost 1,000 years before Jesus. David saw that Jesus' mind is settling down now. He's refocusing. He's not thinking about the hurt any longer. He's suited up. It's game time. Game time. Athletes play through the pain. This is when our minds begin to transition way past the pain and loss and hurt. I like to think our hope must be bigger than our hurt. Verse 26, the meek shall eat and be satisfied. They shall praise the Lord that seek him. Your heart shall live forever. I love this. Our hearts shall live forever. That means that the greatness of who you are will last for an eternity. Who you are will live on forever. You will be recognized in heaven by the people that love you. Everyone is going to love you. Verse 27, all the ends of the world shall remember and turn to the Lord, and all the kindreds of the nations shall worship before thee. In that future, everyone turns on to God. Everyone. Verse 28, for the kingdom is the Lord's, and he is the governor among the nations. No longer will the devil be around to run the systems of the world, to tempt us to do stupid, harmful, self-destructive things. Satan is gone, destroyed, kaput. Verse 29, all they that be fat upon the earth shall eat and worship. I like how it says we will eat and worship. Think about the single best day you ever had in your life. The day that was so good, you actually thank God for it. That will be a normal day in heaven. Actually, it'll be better. Verse 29 continued, all they that go down to the dust shall bow before him, and none shall keep alive his own soul. It will be God who raises us all from the dead. It's not your own works. But as we're learning, what we believe does play a part in it, because I got to say this. I got to say it clear. Because you have all believed that God raised Jesus from the dead, you already have the tools to believe that God will raise you or a loved one from the dead. Ever think about that? I'm going to say it again. Because you already believed that Jesus was raised from the dead, you already have all the tools you need to believe that you or a loved one can be risen from the dead. Look, if you're not enjoying your life right now because you don't feel good, because somebody you love is hurting, because of a great loss, because of struggle or hurt or pain, I guarantee that you will love it in eternity. You will love your eternal life. Verse 30, a seed shall serve him. It shall be accounted to the Lord for a generation. Here is where the lights really came on for me in this Jesus' song, David's song. When I first saw this, I had to actually stop what I was studying and go out for a jog. It was too much for me. David, looking through the eyes and imagination of the Christ, caught a glimpse of a different group of people, all standing together. What Jesus was seeing was a different style of believer than David was used to seeing. For lack of better words, David called them a seed. There's no qualifier this time, no seed of Jacob or seed of Israel. It was used like it was used in verse 23. This is a totally different type of believer, a different type of seed. They didn't dress, move, look, or act like the Hebrew people. They were a rainbow of colors, shapes, and sizes. Again, we are way into the future here. Jesus' hope was what got him through the steep, deep stages of grief. Hebrews 12:2. These are not the people who were recently resurrected in the resurrection of the just. These are not the ones with clean jerseys, no grass stains, and no calluses. These special people called seed are veterans. They are pros. This seed had served with Jesus since the gathering together. What happens next in the song is mind-blowing and should be. Why did Jesus want to stay alive until this point? You might be surprised. There must be a reason. Verse 31, they shall come and shall declare his righteousness unto a people that shall be born. That hath he done this. That he hath done this. Whew. That last verse of this song is so poorly translated, it should be behind bars and wearing an orange jumpsuit. The they and they shall come is talking about the new type of seed of verse 30, the ones he just sang about. He pictures this group of people stepping forward and surrounding him. To declare is the word manifest. It means this new version of seed will all join Jesus in singing the last part of the song. For years, I thought of Jesus as just hanging there alone with his thoughts. He takes his last ragged breath. He belts out the words, "It is finished," then gives up the ghost and dies. Thunder cracks, an earthquake rumbles, temple curtains rip, and it's over. His head falls softly forward. That was not what was going on inside Jesus' head during his final few breaths. Yes, even Jesus had to believe that Jesus would rise from the dead. That's the whole point of this song. To picture our hope so clearly that we fully anticipate our eternity, and we believe that we too will rise from the dead and have an amazing life thereafter. Now let's finish this up. Let's read the last part of verse 31 from the TPT. And they will all declare, "It is finished." Did you notice that it says they will all declare? They are this new type of believer called a seed. In his mind and heart, it was not just the Christ that was shouting out the closing words of this song alone, the final words of his earthly life. It was Jesus and the entire group David nicknamed Seed. Who is this seed? This brand of seed is everyone who ever believed in their hearts that Jesus raised from the dead. I recently heard a quote, "They tried to bury us, but didn't realize we were seeds." This is the moment he lived for. This is what he worked for and was worth dying for. This moment in this song is what kept him going through the worst of times. This moment in his mind is more exciting than the confetti bombs after winning the Super Bowl. It's better than scoring a last-second goal in the World Cup finals and sliding on your knees with fists in the air as a stadium and the world erupts. This is pointing your bat at center field, slugging off a grand slam homer with 2 outs in Game 7 of the World Series. This is that kiss you've been waiting for at the end of every Hallmark movie. You know, when he won, we won. To him, it feels like you were part of his own body. You're the battle buddies he fought alongside through 1,000 conflicts. When the Christ looks out at that massive crowd, he locks eyes with you. He knows you like he knows himself. He nods your way, flashes a smile of thanks. You're totally familiar to him. Jesus saw you and me and millions of others in unison, singing, saying, shouting, and maybe in 1,000 languages, "We won! It's finally finished!" Can you see it? Do you hear it? That's how Christ pictured his hope. He envisioned you and me shouting and walking together with him and the apostles and the entire body of Christ, crossing the threshold into the second paradise together. It is finished. This great song of hope took us from denial and anger to the bargaining process through the deep, dark valley of depression. Then it took us from helpless to hopeful, from hell to healing, from bullying to eternal badassery, from evil kings of the earth to walking with the King on a new heaven and earth. With his final breath, with you in his heart, he could clearly visualize his hope, which has now become your hope. This song was designed to help Jesus believe that he would rise from the dead so that he could bring to pass our new birth that he had talked about his entire ministry. Psalm 22 ends with Jesus picturing all of us, raising our fists in the air, stepping forward into paradise, shouting out together, "We won! It is finished!" That is how Jesus Christ dealt with death, torture, and loss. Psalm 22 is Jesus' master class on grief. God bless.